Hi, everyone. The Partial Prophet here. Thanks for tuning in. So, I wanted to remind you that we know in part and we prophesy in part, and then when Jesus comes, we will see fully. So, today I wanted to talk about time, times, and half a time because I've been seeing a possible pattern, which could be a clue as to what season we're in. So, but first, I wanted to kind of go over an overview of let's kind of look at where we've been and then see if maybe we see some clues about the season that we're in. So, one of the things was okay, so the 70-year time frame, everybody was kind of looking at the 70-year time frame. And I realized that we needed to ask like 70 years and then what? And so, because obviously, when Israel became a nation 70 years later, um, we didn't see the Messiah come back then. And so, it must be that it's 70 years and then something else needs to happen first before the Messiah comes. Okay. So, this is what I wrote. What is God doing? Why hasn't the Messiah come yet? And so, I wanted to remind you that I personally am not looking for the rapture. I don't believe in the traditional rapture teaching, and I covered that in my Left Behind video. Um, if you wanted to know more. So what I am looking for is the Messiah's return. That's what I think is the next step, and like the Messiah's return, I think is going to some of the teachings about the rapture. Um, are really kind of like come out of the verses that are talking about the Messiah's return, like Jesus coming down from the clouds. Um, it's Jesus coming, to the earth. Um, so that's what I believe. So I'm looking for the Messiah's return. I think that's the next step on the prophetical calendar. And so then, like I said, everyone was expecting something to happen, like the rapture around the 70th year anniversary of Israel becoming a nation. Okay, and the reason why is because of Daniel 9 1 to 2. It says, in the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus of Median descent, who was made king over the kingdom of the Chaldeans, in the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, observed in the books the number of the years which was revealed as the word of the Lord to Jeremiah the prophet for the completion of the desolations of Jerusalem, namely 70 years. Okay, so Daniel was looking for a completion. But Gabriel tells Daniel that there'd be another 70 weeks. Okay, so that's in Daniel 9:21 to 22 and 24. Okay, so while I was still speaking in prayer, then the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision previously, came to me in my extreme weariness about the time of the evening offering. He gave me instruction and talked with me and said, "Oh, Daniel, I have now come forth to give you insight with understanding. 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy city to finish the transgression, to make an end to sin, to make atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place." Okay, so then we got this. So it's 70 years and then 70 weeks. Okay, so I was thinking that we needed to be watching the 70th week after President Trump made his declaration about moving the embassy to Jerusalem, which calculated out to be April 10th, 2019. Okay, so that date still ended up being an important day because this was the day when Netanyahu was announced the winner in Israel for the 21st Knesset, but really it was the start of Israel not being able to form a government. So what we're at in Israel is we have two elections and counting. They're talking about a third election in March 2nd. And they still haven't been able to form a government. So that I think was a really, even though Netanyahu was announced the winner on April 10th, the elections was April 9th, and then he was announced the winner on April 10th. Even though he was announced the winner, he was not able to form a government. It started this whole long process of not being able to form a government. Then they had a second election, and then he couldn't form a government. Gans couldn't form a government, and then so now they're waiting to start a third election. Okay, so what I missed in scripture was the concept of the time frame of 2 full years. Okay, so here's my thinking. Okay, so what I think we had is so we kind of have to look at where we've been. And so I think what happened is during the time of Obama, who, I believe he's the what we consider, what we call like the Antichrist figure, the extreme enemy of God. Um, okay, so during the time when he was president, I felt like what God was trying to do was he was using the time of Obama to create, I mean, besides obviously using the time of Obama to bring tribulation to God's people. Like we were in a wilderness time during Obama's presidency. And besides using that time frame to put us under suffering, which God will put his people in wilderness before he does something great. And then but what happened during the time of Obama is we saw a very strong separation between the conservatives and the leftists. I mean, like for me, I all of a sudden started paying attention to politics, and I never paid attention to politics before. So it was definitely an interesting time. And then now in the time of Trump, what I think God is using Trump for is like a further time of testing and further division. Okay. But this time it's a division of the conservatives. Okay. So I think what we're seeing is you have your diehard Trump followers versus the Messiah Jesus followers. Okay. So we're seeing kind of this division. I mean, I don't know if we're seeing it, but I think that's what's happening. You have these diehard Trump followers, and I think a lot of them aren't really the true Messiah Jesus followers. Um, so that's what I think God is trying to accomplish during this time. And then, okay, so like I said, pattern in scripture, God will pick someone and then sends him into the wilderness first. Okay, and then the reason why he does this is the light in the darkness will appear even brighter when there is an even darker darkness. And so, really, what I think is happening is that he has set up this time of Trump being this like false Messiah so that when the true Messiah Jesus comes, we're going to have this really strong contrast between what Trump was like and what the Messiah is like. And Jesus is going to appear even brighter. When you compare the messianic works that Jesus does compared to the messianic like works that Trump has done. So that's kind of what I am thinking. And so I wanted to mention these verses in Jeremiah. So let's read these. Hananiah spoke in the presence of all the people, saying, "Thus says the Lord, even so will I break within 2 full years the yoke of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, from the neck of all the nations." Then the prophet Jeremiah went his way. And then God says to Jeremiah, "Go and speak to Hananiah, saying, Thus says the Lord, you have broken the yokes of wood, but you have made instead of them yokes of iron." Okay, so the story is this is from the book of Jeremiah. So Jeremiah was a prophet. Okay, Hananiah was like a prophet too. Okay, but the thing is that Hananiah turned out to be a false prophet. Okay, and so Jeremiah had to come and say, you are not really teaching the truth. So what's interesting though is that Hananiah used that phrase 2 full years. Okay, so we see that phrase, in the words of Hananiah. And so what the deal is that we could see Hananiah being like a foreshadow of Trump. Okay, and so Trump when he came, he said, okay, I'm gonna break Obama's yoke off of this country. We're gonna turn around the medical insurance thing, and just all the bad stuff that Obama's going to do, we're going to turn it around. And maybe Trump even said, I'm going to do it in 2 years. I'm not really sure. Okay. And so like I do believe that Trump has done that he has broken the yoke of Obama. But what has happened is that he has made, instead of Obama's yoke, now we have Trump's yoke on us, which would be yokes of iron. Okay. And so the people that are kind of under Trump's spell are in these yokes of iron. So that's what I believe. And then, okay, so it's still talking about 2 full years. Okay, so I don't think, though, we'll have to wait till May 14, 2020. Okay, so that would be the date of the 72 years of Israel being a nation. I don't think we have to wait that long. I think the 2 full years relate to the 2 years since President Trump made his announcement about moving the embassy to Jerusalem. Okay. So that's what I think. And so I think we're done with the 2 full years, is what I'm saying. And so what we have is the 2 full years. And so you can connect the full in this expression to like the fullness of the Gentiles. And sometimes I talk about the fullness of the Gentiles being like the fullness of the sins of the Gentiles, is sometimes a way that I look at it. But sometimes people use it to say like the fullness of people that are going to follow Jesus. And it could be kind of both, that this is the work that God was doing during this time, as he was allowing this fullness of sin to happen at the same time that God was building his people. Anyways, so the 2 full years I propose are the time of 666, which culminated in the deal of the century, Trump's deal of the century. Okay, so then let's talk about the 70 weeks then. So how does that all fit in? Okay, so so I would say that the 70 weeks kind of fits in. Well, let me read what I wrote here. Okay, so first of all, what I wanted to talk about first was, okay, so in Daniel 8, let me read this. It says, "Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to that particular one who was speaking, 'How long will the vision about the regular sacrifice apply, while the transgression causes horror, so as to allow both the holy place and the host to be trampled?' He said to me, 'For 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the holy place will be properly restored.'" Okay, so we have this time frame in Daniel that's 2,300 evenings and mornings. And so what I wrote was, when it says for both the holy place and the host to be trampled, the host would be like an army. Okay, and so what I think is happening is that both, I mean, you could see that maybe it's saying both, like, Israel and America are going to be trampled during this time, or both the places, the nations, God's nations, are going to be trampled, and his people at the same time. And so what's interesting is that in these verses it calls it the regular sacrifice. So kind of like during these 2,300 evenings, there was this regular sacrifice happening probably on a regular basis, is kind of what it's saying. And I thought it was interesting that this is in, Daniel 8:13 is the first verse that mentions it, because I definitely apply the number 13 to Obama. So anyways, so I wanted to propose that these 2,300 days was Obama's presidency, which was approximately 6.38 years if you do the math. Obviously Obama was president longer, but I think, like, my thinking is that he didn't have a total of 8 years power to do whatever he wanted. God only gave him 6.38 years of power to do whatever he wanted. And then, because some of that might be like the lead up, when he first became president, he was like, trying to get his feet wet. He, brought in Hillary, so I don't, things didn't start like day one, so anyways, and then it's interesting too that it's 20, I mean, It's interesting that it's 2,300 days because I think 23 is another number that attaches to Obama. So kind of interesting. Okay, so that's the 2,300 time frame. And then it goes on and says in Daniel 12, we see some other time frames where it says from the time that the regular sacrifice is abolished. So if the time of Obama was the regular sacrifice, then it gets abolished. Okay, and the abomination of desolation is set up. There will be 1290 days. How blessed is he who keeps waiting and attains to the 1335 days. But as for you, go your way to the end, then you will enter into rest and rise again for your allotted portion at the end of the age. Okay, so what I want to propose is that the 1290 days is July 18th, 2016 to January 28th, 2020 inclusive, and includes both those dates as 1290 days. Okay, so what happened July 18, 2016? That was the start of the Republican National Convention where Trump and Pence were declared the nominees for president. Okay, so what I think it is, and see, this is why you wouldn't have like the full 8 years, because I think what happened with Obama, like what happens is, what I think what happens with God is that he allows people to do things, but then at a certain point he says, you're done, I'm going to appoint a new person. And so for Obama, that started July 18th. God started causing Trump, to come in, he started doing the work so that Trump could become the president. And so that started on July 18, 2016. And obviously, Obama was still president for a while. And then what's interesting about these 1290 days is the time frame is also 42 months, 11 days. So it's kind of interesting because in Revelation 11:12, it talks about treading underfoot the holy city for 42 months. So what I mean, I have in my previous videos, I've applied the 42 months to like Hillary and Obama, but I think we could see a second fulfillment where it's 42 months during President Trump's presidency, where he's also treading underfoot the holy city too, in his unique way, with the deal of century and everything. Okay. And so then God says in these verses too, you're blessed if you wait for the 1335 days. Okay, so if you take that same date of July 18th, you get March 13th, 2020 would be the 1335 days. I'm really hoping we don't have to wait that long, and I'm kind of thinking we won't have to wait that long. But it's possible. So hang in there though. It'd be really close. But that also doesn't necessarily mean that we wouldn't see the Messiah before this time frame, because the Messiah could show up and then something else could happen. Anyways, I'm not really sure. Okay. But what is interesting is that 42 days after the deal of the century is March 10th, which is Purim. So that could be a really important date, on a prophetical date, because of that 42 days after the deal of the century. Because we've seen how the deal of the century has really unleashed Israel's enemies, and they're really, trampling on Israel. And so that's why March 10th could be kind of an important date to look at. And then we have March 13th would be like 3 days later. So definitely kind of interesting. But I have another thinking about the 1335. I mean, I'm always trying to make it like, oh, it's got to be sooner. We don't have to wait all the way till March 10th because, oh, goodness gracious, we've been waiting so long. But here's what I'm seeing with the 1335. It's possible too that this 1335 is like numbers can always be symbolic too. And so I'm wondering if 1335 connects to the time, times, and half a time, where you have the 1 connects to the times is the 33, and the half a time is the 5. Because, like if you write 0.5, that would be like a half. Okay. So let's see. Okay, so then I wanted to talk about okay, so let's look at the the 42 months. Okay, well, so what's kind of really interesting is I looked at these verses again, and in Revelation 11, and God's prophetical word is so rich and full that when it has multiple fulfillments, it's just kind of wild that it works out that way. So like I said, these verses definitely seem to apply to the work that Obama and Clinton did, the mess that they made of the world. But then let's look at this with what's going on now, because it's interesting, because I think I'm seeing a second fulfillment. And so Revelation 11 says, "Then there was given me a measuring rod like a staff, and someone said, 'Get up and measure the temple of God and the altar and those who worship in it. Leave out the court which is outside the temple and do not measure it, for it has been given to the nations, and they will tread underfoot the holy city for 42 months. Okay, so what's interesting is that in Ezekiel, it's kind of a similar concept where someone was given a measuring rod, and the measuring rod is 6 cubits long, which is very interesting. Because we're kind of seeing a connection to Trump 666. Okay, so what's interesting is if you, I'm really seeing kind of a fulfillment, a connection to the deal of the century, because let me read this article to you and you'll see too. Okay, so this is from, okay, so it says, the title of the article is U.S. Administration Names Panel for West Bank Annexation. And this is from February 16, 2020. Okay, so the U.S. government has appointed members of a committee tasked with mapping out areas of the occupied West Bank that Israel plans to annex as part of President Donald Trump's self-proclaimed deal of the century. A senior Trump administration official told Israel Hayom Daily that U.S. Ambassador to Israel David Friedman will lead the joint committee. Honored to serve on the joint committee, tweeted Friedman Saturday, looking forward to getting started right away, he said. Other committee members will include Friedman's senior advisor, Ray Lightstone, and Scott Leith, a U.S. National Security Council expert on Israel. Israeli members will include Tourism Minister Yariv Levin and Israeli Ambassador to the United States Ron Dermer, PNN reports. The committee was announced by Trump last month during the unveiling of his scheme, which would see Israel control swatches of swaths of the West Bank in violation of the fundamental rights of the Palestinians. Trump said the joint committee would be formed to convert the conceptual map into a more detailed and calibrated rendering so that recognition can be immediately achieved. There is still no set timeline for when the committee will finish its work. Okay, so I'm kind of thinking the committee will not finish its work. Is this not fascinating? Okay, so we see what's happening is, okay, so it says someone, in the verse it says, in Revelation it says, someone said, get up and measure the temple of God. Okay, who's that someone? Okay, we're seeing the someone is Donald Trump. He's saying go measure the country of Israel so we could see how to divide it up between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And then it says, leave out the court which is outside the temple and do not measure it, for it has been given to the nations. So, like he's saying, don't measure, like, the East Jerusalem is going to be given to the Palestinians under Trump's plan. And so, they probably don't have to measure that, although they probably will. But, it's interesting how this kind of fits. Anyways, so I think we're seeing a fulfillment of these verses. Okay, and then let's see. Okay, so what's interesting is when Daniel talks about the 70 weeks, he says 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy city to finish the transgression, to make an end of sin, to make atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. So I highlighted to finish the transgression and to make an end of sin, because I think what we're seeing is, I think there's 70 weeks, okay? There's the 70 weeks of the false Messiah and then the 70 weeks of the true Messiah. is what I'm thinking. And so what happens with Trump's 70 weeks is that he's finishes his transgression. He made an he's made fullness of sin by completing, getting to the point where he announced the steal of the century. Okay. And so then what I did was I wanted, since I think Donald Trump's 70 weeks ended on the deal of the century, which was January 28th, I wanted to see what happened 70 weeks before. And that was September 26, 2018, which was Sukkot Day 3. And Trump was with Netanyahu at the United Nations. And this is the first time that we heard Trump say, I like the two-state solution. And it was interesting. I mean, it was interesting that you had Trump saying that right there with Netanyahu right there. And then what's really interesting, if you look at the transcript of the speech, he actually says it 3 times. Okay. And then he says something similar for the 4th time. Something else about the two-state for the 4th time. But it's very interesting to me that he said it 3 times. And then, okay, so Daniel 9 says, so you are to know and discern that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. It will be built again with plaza and moat, even in times of distress. Okay, so one fulfillment, I think, of the 7 weeks is that Trump's impeachment process took exactly 7 weeks. Okay, so 12/18/2019 was when they voted in the House, and 2/5/2020 was when they voted in the Senate, which was when they acquitted him. Okay. And then also there's a 7 weeks after the House announced 2 articles of impeachment, which was 12/10/19. That led to the date of the deal of the century. So there's 2 different things that could connect to the 7-week time frame. Okay. And then later on I'll talk about the 62 weeks. But I want to talk about this part of the verse where it says, after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing, or the anointed one will be cut off and have nothing, and the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. Okay, so it says after 62 weeks, the anointed one will be cut off. Okay, 12/3/2019 is the 62nd week, going starting with that date of, where's the date? September 26, 2018. So the 62nd week, it says on 12/4. So what's interesting is the 62nd week then would have been 12/3/2019. And then on 12/4/2019 was when the Democrats aimed for impeachment vote before Christmas. So we see, kind of this concept of Trump, being cut off, or trying to be cut off. Okay. And then also during this week is 12/6/19, and that was, so this, okay, this is interesting. This is very fascinating. This 12/6/19 would be the 2-year anniversary of the embassy announcement. Okay. So so it's interesting that God talks about in these verses the Messiah will be cut off after the 62 weeks. Okay. It could also be another way of saying the anointed one will be cut off after the 2 full years. Okay. So I think what we've entered into after, what we've entered into is, kind of the end of Trump's time. So that started on the 62nd week. And then I thought it was interesting too. The 63rd week started on 12/10. That was when 2 articles of impeachment were announced by the House. The 66th week started on 12/31/19. That was 2 days later was when Soleimani was killed. So definitely a very interesting week. And then the 69th week started on January 21st. Okay, so that was, okay, I think that was an important date in prophecy. The 69th week. Okay. Because that was 12 months after the super blood wolf moon. It was 23 months after Billy Graham died. It was 9 months after Easter. It was 29 months after the Great American Solar Eclipse. And that was the day that Trump turned 73 years, 7 months, and 7 days. Okay, so I think it was a very important day prophetically. And then exactly 1 week later was um, the deal of the century, was revealed. Um, so definitely, I think, so I think the fulfillment of the 69th week was January 21st, and then the fulfillment of the 70th week, Trump's 70th week, was the deal of the century. Okay. And so then what I'm seeing, so what I'm wondering too is with these 62 weeks, if there's like, what we're seeing is like 2 weeks, okay? Or, what I've seen is like 2 weeks, okay? And okay, so in Daniel 9:25 it says, "So you are to know and discern that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem will until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. Okay, it will be built again with plaza and moat, even in times of distress. Then, after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing, and the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. And its end will come with the flood, even to the end there will be war, desolations are determined, and he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering, and on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed is poured out on the one who makes desolate." Okay, so what I propose, and I actually talked about this in my last video, is we have 2 weeks that would be like the 62 weeks, okay? Because week 1 was actually January 26th to February 1st. Okay, so we see that 62 kind of repeated in the 26 date. Okay, and so January 26th was interesting because it was the end of the rainy winter in Israel. And then in the middle of the week was January 28th, was when the deal of the century was released. Okay, so you could say that that is supposed to be a proposal to put a stop to sacrifice, okay? To try to bring peace to Israel, okay? It's not going to do that, but that was the attempt, okay? What was interesting too, exactly on that day, Netanyahu was indicted, okay? You talk about fast judgment of God, definitely very interesting. Okay, and then what was interesting too in that week was on January 29th, we had Netanyahu on Fox saying peace and security. Okay, so then I proposed that the second week we wanted to look at was February 2nd to February 8th. So February 2nd was Groundhog Day. We see the Groundhog Day talks about 6 more weeks of winter, so we see the 6 and the 2 repeated in the Groundhog Day picture. In the middle of the week, that was when Trump on February 4th had his State of the Union, and he definitely talked about peace and security for America, okay? And then what was interesting on February 5th was that we saw Trump being acquitted, which you could say was a stop to grain offering. So definitely all very interesting. And so I talk about this more in my last video, but what I wanted to bring up was I sort of kind of missed that there's a third week, okay? So I was like, 62 weeks and then the Messiah will come. Oh no, there's a third week. Okay, so because then it says he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. Okay, so what I'm thinking is this firm covenant that is being made. I think the firm covenant is God. Okay, so what I think is we had the week 1, we had the week 2. February 10th was Tu B'Shvat. It happened on the 10th, and so I think it was a type of Yom Kippur, which is where, when God decides judgment, okay? Or it's the start of God deciding judgment, or whatever you want to call it. And so then what we had is this week 3, I'd like to propose was February 15th through February 21st, okay? And what was interesting in that week, in the middle of the week, Trump was like pardoning a bunch of people on February 18th. Okay, so that was kind of interesting. But if God's making the firm covenant, I think God is the one that's going to put a stop to sacrificing grain offering. And so what I kind of think is happening is that, this during this week was when God was like, okay, like deciding that. And what's interesting too, um, during this week, it happened while the Jewish people were reading Mishpatim, which is about judgments. Okay, so I think judgments were happening, and God was, deciding that, okay, Trump's going to be gone and new people are going to be coming in. Okay, so what happened was on the third day of this week was Pharaoh's birthday. Okay, um, uh, so let me talk about that. So we see that in the story of Joseph. It talks about the third day being Pharaoh's birthday. Okay, um, that's from Genesis 40:20. Okay, so the third day of this week was February 17th. Okay, that was the day. What's very interesting is that was President's Day. Okay, so like Pharaoh's birthday could connect to President's Day. It was also Hanukkah 8/1. I've been following Hanukkah week since the original Hanukkah. So that's very interesting when you see that number 8 that kind of connects to Obama, because like he was the 6th and then he's also going to be the 8th, like president. And then what's very interesting on this date, it was the 13th. There's that 13 again, and anniversary of Obama declaring his presidential run at the building in Illinois where Lincoln delivered his House divided speech. Okay, that's on the Hebrew calendar. It was the 13th anniversary. Okay. I mean, like, things are so fascinating because it's interesting when you think about Lincoln delivering his House divided speech. I mean, it just would apply so well today, okay? Because we're definitely like on the precipice of a civil war in this country. And then what's very interesting too was that was the day. Okay, so they were supposed to have the where's my notes here? They were supposed to have the Daytona 500 was supposed to happen on the 16th, but it got rained out, had a rain delay. Okay, so then it happened on the 17th, which is definitely kind of interesting. And what's very interesting is you had this car. Okay, so what's the guy's name? Newman. Okay, what was very interesting is that he was driving a car that had number 6 on it. It ends up flipping around. There was a fiery crash, and it's almost like you could read the 6 to be number 9. Okay, so what I think is we're seeing, I think what that was is a messianic sign. Okay, because first of all, look at the guy's name, Newman. Okay, new man. Okay, or it could just be God's way of saying, okay, Trump's gonna be out. We're gonna have a new man in charge. But I also think it connects to the Messiah because of the 6 and the 9. Because I talk about darkness. When Jesus was on the cross, there was darkness from the 6th hour to the 9th hour. And so what I think was the 6th hour is the time of Obama being president. The 7th hour is the time of Trump being president. The 8th hour is when Obama comes back, and God allows him to destroy things. And then the 9th hour would be when Messiah comes to rule and reign. So I definitely, God was giving us a messianic sign during that week, and so I think what he was saying is that, during this week, God was deciding, okay, Trump's out, Obama's going to come back, and the Messiah's going to come. Okay. And then what's interesting too is that the dates of the 15th to the 21st was when they were supposed to eat unleavened bread. Okay. So what I think was really interesting, and then the 21st day is supposed to be the last day of final judgment. And so what I think, what God was doing was he starts judgment on the 10th, Yom Kippur, and then he completes it on the 21st. So it was the final week where God was going to see what bread we were going to eat. We were going to eat bread with leavening that week, or we're going to eat bread with unleavening. Were we going to follow Trump and Netanyahu as false messiahs, or were we going to, hold out and wait for the true Messiah who has unleavened bread? Okay. So that's what I'd like to propose. Okay. And then what else was interesting, the middle of the week could also be 219 20, which was the 24th of Shabbat. Okay, which was a very interesting day because that was the 1 year after the super snow moon last year. And then it turned out to be exactly, okay, so it's exactly 1 week before 126, okay, which is tomorrow, okay? So I think that could be, we could see a pattern here because in January, okay, so remember the pattern in January was on January 21st, which was the 1 year anniversary of the super blood wolf moon. Exactly 1 week later was the deal of the century. So something really prophetical happened exactly 1 week later. So, so that's why I want to really wait and see what's going to happen tomorrow because I think it could be really prophetical. So that's interesting. And then, okay, so some other things that I'm looking at. It says, okay, so from Genesis 40, it says, thus it came about on the third day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his office, and he put the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But he hung the chief baker just as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Okay, so lifted up the heads. What was interesting on the third day of this week that I'm talking about, February 15th to February 21st, was, okay, both Obama and Trump tried to take credit for the economy on 2/17. Okay, so they were both kind of lifting up their own heads. Okay, and then it talks about restoring the chief cupbearer to his office. Okay, so are we going to see Obama restored? Okay, I think we are. Okay, and then it talks about putting the cup in the Pharaoh's hand. Okay, so I wrote like, okay, so like it's kind of like the cup of wrath. I mean, you always got to ask when it says he put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. Okay, who is the he? Okay, who's putting the cup into whose hand? Okay, who's Pharaoh? In this verse, so it could be that that, I mean, it could be Obama's putting the cup of wrath into somebody's hand. And like we kind of see that in the story of Joseph, where Joseph put the cup in Benjamin's sack. Okay. And so, actually, so what we're seeing is like the people of Obama, I mean, I think everyone who doesn't follow Messiah, are, like part of the Antichrist system. And so, God's going to use those people in the Antichrist system to bring the punishment for the one with the cup. Okay, so the cup gets put into Benjamin's sack, which I think Benjamin could be a picture of Israel, a picture of Netanyahu, because it's, the same name, Benjamin Netanyahu. Because judgment is going to come to Prime Minister Netanyahu for, supporting this deal of the century, for dividing the land, okay? So anyways, but another picture that could be painting is that the chief cupbearer, I talked about this in one of my previous videos, is the chief cupbearer could be Messiah, and then the Messiah putting the cup into Pharaoh's hand is Jesus putting the cup into Obama's hand, which be a picture of, like Jesus telling Judas, what you're going to do it quickly. Okay. So that also could be happening too. Okay. Let's see. Then it says, but he hung the chief baker just as Joseph had interpreted. So I think what we're going to see, the fulfillment of this prophecy is we're going to see Netanyahu get hung, killed. Okay. So let's see. Okay, so I wanted to talk about the chief baker. Okay. When the chief baker saw that he interpreted favorably, he said to Joseph, I also saw in my dream, and behold, there were 3 baskets of white bread on my head. And in the top basket there was some of all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh. And the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. Then Joseph answered and said, this is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you, and will hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh off of you. Okay, 3 baskets are 3 days. Okay, so but what is the 3 days or 3 weeks? Okay, so this 3 week time frame that I'm talking about. And then it says within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you. Then you have half a week here. What if that's what we're seeing in these verses? Okay, and so one of the things I wanted to say was, remember that Erdogan is the raven that Trump released in October. Okay, so the birds that we could be seeing could be connected to Erdogan in Turkey, but we kind of have this like gathering of the people. I talked about the Rit Rats, and the Rit stands for Russia, Iran, and Turkey. Okay, so we kind of see them kind of coming together. So it could just be the Turkey guy raising up against Israel. It could be all three of them working together. We'll have to see how that works. Okay, and then we see kind of the same concept in Esther, where Esther talks about the Jews fasting for 3 days, night or day. And then Esther goes to the king on the third day. So, so like the first, the fasting for 3 days is the 3 weeks, and then Esther to the king on the third day is the half the time. Okay. The time times and half the time. Okay. Okay, so I wanted to mention, because what's very interesting, okay, so this is very interesting, is that in Esther 4:11, here's what Esther says. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that for any man or woman who comes to the king to the inner court who is not summoned, he has but one law, that he be put to death, unless the king holds out to him the golden scepter, so that he may live. And I have not been summoned to come to the king for these 30 days. Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. And I and my maidens will also fast in the same way. And thus I will go into the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went away and did just as Esther had commanded him. Okay, so what we see is this 30-day time frame. And so it's interesting what Esther says. He says, if you go to the king in the inner court without being summoned, you are to be put to death. Okay. And so, first of all, we're seeing this concept of like, okay, now that Trump and Netanyahu have done this deal of the century, they're under judgment. Okay. And so what we could see with Esther is like she could be saying that America is under judgment for 30 days. Okay. And we have been under judgment since, we've been under judgment for a while because of all the stuff that Trump's been doing, but especially the last 30 days. Like what's interesting to me is that I don't know the exact date when the coronavirus came to America, but it was like a week or two before the deal of the century. So God's actually kind of efficient, is that, he'll bring judgment, early. And so I think the coronavirus on America's shores is part of the judgment for the deal of the century. All the winter storms we've been having since then are judgment, all the flooding we've been having, so definitely under judgment. Okay, and so then what I wanted to propose was, okay, so we got 30 days from the deal of the century is February 26th. It's tomorrow, okay? So what is going to happen after these 30 days, okay? So what's very interesting tomorrow is that it's Erdogan's 66th birthday, which I thought was very interesting, okay? You see that 66 there. It's Ash Wednesday, okay, on the Christian calendar, okay? That could be a very prophetical, date. And then on the Jewish people, okay, so it's Adar 1 on the Hebrew calendar, and the Jewish people believe that the plague of darkness started on Adar 1, okay? So that's why I said, let's see what happens. I think it could be really prophetical tomorrow because it's 30 days. Okay. So like I said, fast for 3 days, night or day. Is this the 3 weeks? Esther to king on the third day. Is this the half the time or the half week that we're looking for? Okay. So, so I was kind of writing like, okay, so we got the dates, the 22nd, 23rd, 24th, 25th, 26th. I highlighted the 24th because we definitely, want to keep an eye on the 24th date, because Daniel kind of had a messianic vision appearing on the 24th. So what was interesting to me is, so when do we start counting, like the third day is kind of my question. And I'm kind of wondering if we start counting it on the 24th, okay? And so what was very interesting is that on the 23rd and the 24th, we had Israel, once again, a barrage of rockets from Gaza happened on the 23rd to the 24th, over a 24-hour time period. Kind of interesting. Like, did I say like 90 to 100 rockets? Depending on who you listen to, it's always a different number. What was very interesting was on the 24th, that was when Netanyahu declares war, on Gaza, basically. He said if Gaza doesn't behave, we're going to go to war. Okay, so very interesting dates. Okay, so then what's interesting, so he said that on Monday, so what's going to happen on the third day after that, which would be tomorrow. So definitely be interesting to see what would happen. So other dates, let's see, other things that I want to look at is, so I repeated this information at the top, just so we could keep an eye on it while I'm talking about this other stuff. So what else was interesting was February 24th was the 17th year anniversary of the Columbia Space Shuttle tragedy. Okay. So 17, that number 17 comes from the Great Flood started on the 17th. Okay. So what was kind of interesting, and with the Great Flood, you have kind of the bowels of the earth were released and the heavens were released. Okay. So definitely interesting that we saw kind of like a fulfillment of that on the 24th, where you have the rockets coming. Well, you have the rockets coming from Gaza, and the bowels of the earth would be like the people sending the rockets, but then we have Netanyahu like kind of losing it, saying we're going to start war. So what was interesting is that, so I put that V there. So that is actually, the reason why I said that is that this is so to keep track of these two space shuttle tragedies. Okay, is the Columbia Space Shuttle tragedy was re-entering the atmosphere when it burnt up. Okay, and then 7 people were killed. What's very interesting is the deal of the century was the 34th anniversary, which, by the way, 17 plus 17 equals 34, was the 34th anniversary of the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster. That was on their Gregorian calendar. Okay, so what was interesting is that was them, that was on takeoff, so they were going up. So I don't know if God's trying to connect these two dates, like the deal of the century with February 24th. But 73 seconds after the Space Shuttle Challenger went up, it exploded and 7 people were killed. So definitely very interesting prophetically speaking. Okay, and then what's very interesting is today is Mardi Gras. Ooh, happy Mardi Gras. Which is like an American Purim. Okay, why? Why is it like an American? Oh, and actually, I wrote American Purim, but they actually do carnival in other countries of the world, Catholic countries. It's a kind of started out as like a Catholic holiday and turned into this carnival, Mardi Gras thing. And so it kind of connects to Purim because they're wearing masks, and they're celebrating. and so very similar to the Jewish Purim um, type celebration. So I thought that was very interesting. And we've already sort of seen with the carnival season, like just a negativity connected to this carnival season. Because let me tell you why. Okay, so first of all, at the Belgium Carnival, there was anti-Semitic images in their parade, which was not good. Um, let's see, in Venice, Italy, the carnival was canceled due to the coronavirus. Um, and then in Germany, there was a car attack, and this actually happened on the 24th. Um, there was a car attack that ended up injuring 30 people. So like the carnival season is kind of been kind of negative. So let's see. Okay, so what's interesting about Mardi Gras? So what's interesting about this date, February 25th, is it's also Rosh Chodesh 1. Okay, so when the Jewish people talk about Rosh Chodesh, so that's the Jewish holiday, they talk about it being a woman, being a holiday that's especially important for the women. Okay, and so they're like supposed to have a festive meal on that day, so that definitely connects to Mardi Gras. What's very interesting too about this date, February 25th, is okay, so we've been talking about I can't remember if I mentioned this in my videos, but Steve Fletcher has been talking about February being the 12th month. He mentioned this is where I heard about it first. Is like if you look, like if you know the history of the calendar, February was actually the 12th month. And so what's interesting is today would be 12/25, so which is kind of interesting, kind of like a Christmas, so that's all kind of interesting. What else was I going to say about that? Oh, so what's interesting too is the Dar 1, which is tomorrow, is the start of the 12th month on the Hebrew calendar. Okay, so and if we understand the concept of the 12th month being like the last month of the year, then it's definitely a very interesting prophetical date that we want to watch for last days things. Okay. And then, so Exodus 23:18 says, "You shall not offer the blood of my sacrifice with leavened bread, nor is the fat of my feast to remain overnight until morning." Okay, so I see connection with this verse to Fat Tuesday. Okay, so this comes out of the law. So that's why I really want to pay attention to what happens tonight. Okay, because the fat of the feast is not to remain overnight until morning. Okay, so it'd be interesting to see what happens overnight. We see God saying, "Don't offer the blood of my sacrifice with leavened bread." Okay, so what I really think is what he's saying is you do not want to be connected to Trump and Netanyahu, because they are going to cause the nation of Israel to be sacrificed. They are the leavened bread. Okay. I don't know if I talked about this in my videos, but I saw a connection with Pentecost and the 2 loaves of leavened bread that get offered up on Pentecost. Okay, those 2 loaves are connected to President Trump and Netanyahu because they have leavening in their lives. Okay, and so there was a fulfillment of that Pentecost picture with the 2 loaves. I don't remember when that got fulfilled, but it was a while ago. And so what was I going to say about that? So really what I'm seeing is this connection with the 2 loaves of leavened bread, which is always kind of weird when God talks about, okay, there's a new sacrifice and it's leavened bread, because God is definitely in favor of unleavened bread. So that's why you want to pay attention to that. And so I think the 2 loaves of leavened bread connect to the two witnesses, which, I think are Trump and Netanyahu. Okay, so definitely very interesting. So then, okay, so I already said this. February 26th is Ash Wednesday. Adar 1, Plague of Darkness. Erdogan's birthday is 66. Okay. What else is interesting about this week is February 29th is Leap Day in America. So definitely very interesting. Want to pay attention to that. I mean, could we see on Leap Day the Messiah leap in the womb? So definitely we'll see what happens. Okay. So sign of Jonah. Let's see. Okay, so I talked about this before. I think this also could connect to the time and half the times, because you have Jonah as 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the sea monster. So 3 days could be 3 weeks, 3 nights could be the half a week. And then what we've kind of seen in these verses is you have Jonah is 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the sea monster, and then you have the Son of Man is 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Okay, so Jonah could either be Israel or the Kurds in the belly of Trump. Trump is the sea monster. And then the Son of Man, 3 days, 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Israel could be the Son of Man. Let's see. Yeah, so I'm kind of wondering, because I didn't know for sure. One thought I had was, okay, here's 2 thoughts that I have for possible fulfillments. One is, are we going to see in the American Purim or the Catholic Purim or whatever season, are we going to see, I don't know if things are going to blow up in Syria, and we're going to see maybe Kurds killed. We're going to see a bunch of people killed in Syria. Okay. And that could be setting the stage for the next Purim, for the Jewish Purim, which happens on March 10th. That is a possibility. Okay. And that, because what we see is 2 feasts, of that. There's 2 feasts of Esther. And so, things could happen. There could be a feast during this season where people get killed in Syria, and then that could be the final straw that gets Israel's enemies ready to attack them on March 10th. Okay, that's a possibility. The other thing too, the other possible fulfillment. So that's one possible fulfillment. The other possible fulfillment is that when it talks about Jonah being 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the sea monster, that could be the enemies of God in the belly of the sea monster, so in the belly of Trump. And so they have already been in the belly of Trump, since the deal of the century. Basically what I'm saying is, okay, so the belly of the sea monster connects to, okay, Daniel's statue, you have the belly. Okay, and if you watch my previous videos, I have Obama is the belly of the beast. Okay. And so what we had was Trump was doing very Antichrist behavior with this deal of the century. And so what he did with the deal of the century is that, he's caused Israel's enemies, to want to kill them, basically. Okay, so we have Jonah could be the enemies of God. They're in the belly of Trump. They're mad about the deal of the century. They're, chomping at the bit to kill Israel. Okay, and so then what we're going to see is the Son of Man, where it's 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Earth could connect to America, or the heart of the earth. I mean, either we could be seeing, the Son of Man connecting to Israel being killed, and then, their dead bodies for 3 days. So we're seeing the 3 days could be the 3 weeks, that in the heart of the earth, suffering the consequences of the deal of the century. And then the 3 nights could be they, get killed and then they're dead for 3 days. Dead bodies for 3 days. 3.5 days. Okay. So we'll see what happens. Okay, so I wanted to see is Super Bowl 54 gave us any clues about this. So what's interesting is we see that 21 number in the fourth quarter, so that could connect to the 3 weeks. And then we saw 31 was the final score, and so that could connect to the time times and half a time, like oh, I made this work in my head before. Let's see. Anyways, like maybe that connects to the final 3 days or something, you know, the final half of a week or something like that. Anyways, so that's what I'm wondering. And what's interesting too is that with Andy Reid, we saw the movement from 21 to 22. So maybe the movement from the 3 weeks to the final half of a week. So anyways, so just wondering about that. Okay, and then so I've been following multiple Hanukkah weeks. I won't go over this list because I did this in a previous video, but here's the first 4 weeks. And then so I added, let's see, so I added Hanukkah 6. Like, I'm not covering every day because that's way too much information. But Hanukkah 7 on day 5. Okay, so what I added was on day 5 of Hanukkah 7 was when the Jewish people read the verse where God tells Moses to tell the people, be ready for the third day. So I think that might have been a really interesting, I think that might have been really prophetical to read that, be ready for the third day, because, okay, so that, let me find this on my calendar. So that happened on, okay, so that happened on the 21st. Okay. Oh, which would make sense. Would be, okay, does that work? 17. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, that was the 5th day of this week. Oh, no, I'm getting all confused here. Okay, so that, oh, no wonder why I can't find it. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so that actually happened on February 13th, was when the Jewish people read, be ready for the third day. So that was interesting because that was 3 days after Tu B'Shavat. So definitely could be God saying, okay, I made judgment on the 10th. Be ready for the third day is when we're going to see judgment played out. And then what else happened on that day? So what was very interesting too on this day, February 13th, was when the head of the Iran Revolutionary Guard said Iran is ready to strike. Oops, I wrote that wrong. Ready to strike the U.S. and Israel. Okay. So it was interesting that happened on the same day that we read be ready for the third day, because maybe that was God's way of saying what's going to happen on the third day. Israel's going to get attacked. And then what's interesting too is that happened on the 13th, which we see a connection to the Antichrist with that number there. Okay, so then Hanukkah, the 8th week of Hanukkah, was February 17th to the 24th. Day 3 was 1 year for the super snow moon. Day 5 was 2 years after Billy Graham's death. Day 8 was February 24th. Okay. Oh, so I wrote the day before. Okay, so I actually, I forgot I was going to look this up, but there was a memorial for Kobe Bryant on Monday. Okay, very interesting. So there's this 24 number is just like, God is just like screaming this 24 number. Okay, with, we saw it in the Super Bowl, and then we see it with the Kobe Bryant all over the news, this number 24. And so they had a memorial on Monday which was the 24th. I mean, so very interesting. Um, and then, um, and we're seeing that number 8 too. Okay. Um, so definitely very interesting. And then I think actually on the 23rd, they might have had some kind of tribute too, because I just saw something really quickly on the news. There was a violin player, um, like in between huge letters or huge numbers saying 8 and 24. Um, and so I didn't get a chance to, I didn't know if that was the guy practicing for the memorial or there was actually another tribute that happened on Sunday. I'm not sure. But definitely very interesting. And then, so Hanukkah 9 ends up being today. It started today and goes through March 3rd. What's interesting is that day 3, which is the 27th of February, is the Armenian Candlemas. Okay. And so, Candlemas is considered like the end of the Christmas season. What's interesting too is that the 27th in Genesis 8:14 talks about the second month, the 27th day, the earth is dry. So definitely kind of interesting. Day 5 is leap day. I mentioned that already. Day 8 is Adar 7, which was the death of Moses. Which actually that day, I wanted to look this up too. That day too could actually be the 2-year, or I don't know how many months. The 2-year anniversary of Billy Graham's death on the Hebrew calendar. And which actually though, I don't think Billy Graham actually died on Adar 7. But it was close. Anyways, so because people made connections to the death of Moses and Billy Graham. So that's interesting because that happens on Super Tuesday, March 3rd. So Adar 7 is March 3rd. Super Tuesday is that day. Very kind of interesting. And then what's interesting is the day before is March 2nd, which is when they were planning to have the next round of elections in Israel. So definitely very prophetical possible days that we want to keep an eye on. And then, okay, so then I just wanted to bring up the verses that talk about time, times, and half a time. So it says the 2 wings of the great eagle were given to the woman so that she could fly into the wilderness to her place, where she was nourished for time, times, and half a time from the presence of the serpent. So one thought that I had where in this verse where it talks about the 2 wings, okay, so the woman would be like the church, okay, the Gentiles or Ephraim. And then it talks about, or it could even be a picture of America. And then, so it says 2 wings of the great eagle were given to the woman, so that she could fly into the wilderness to her place. So I highlighted 2 wings and I highlighted to her place. Okay. So, because I mentioned where, I thought during the time of Trump, we were seeing a further division, and so when it talks about the 2 wings, what if one of the wings are Messiah and one of the wings are Trump, the false Messiah? Okay, and so kind of this idea of, okay, the woman's gonna fly into the wilderness, and and you're gonna decide whether you're gonna follow the true Messiah Jesus or you're gonna follow the false Messiah Trump. Okay, and so what this happens during time, times, and half a time. Okay, in the wilderness. Okay, and so that's what I think could be happening. And so we've been through, 3 weeks, and maybe we're in the middle of the half the time. I don't know. We'll have to see what happens, where I don't know if we got to wait for the half the time is going to happen at Pura. I'm not sure. But anyways, what I think is we're being tested right now. Who are we going to follow? Okay, so that's that. And then in Ezekiel, oh yeah, so the reason why I mention that is that we see this in Ezekiel 17. Okay, we see this concept of, okay, so let me read this to you. Now the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, propound a riddle, and speak a parable to the house of Israel, saying, Thus says the Lord God, a great eagle with great wings, long pinions, and in full plumage of many colors came to Lebanon, and took away the top of the cedar. He plucked off the topmost of its young twigs, and brought it to a land of merchants. He set it in a city of traders. He also took some of the seed of the land and planted it in fertile soil. He placed it beside abundant waters. He set it up like a willow. Then it sprouted and became a low spreading vine, with its branches turned toward him, but its roots remained under it. So it became a vine and yielded shoots and sent out branches. But there was another great eagle with great wings and much plumage, and behold, this vine bent its roots toward him and sent out his branches toward him from the beds where it was planted, that he might water it. It was planted in good soil besides abundant waters, that it might yield branches and bear fruit and become a splendid vine. Say, Thus says the Lord God, will it thrive? Will he not pull up its roots and cut off its fruit, so that it withers, so that all its sprouting leaves wither? And neither by great strength nor by many people can it be raised from its roots again. Behold, though it is planted, will it thrive? Will it not completely wither as soon as the east wind strikes it? Wither on the beds where it grew. Okay, so we see this concept of two eagles, okay? I think the first eagle that I put in blue is talking about Messiah, okay, because the roots remain, okay? And then the second eagle withers after the east wind strikes it, okay? So I've talked about the east wind being connected to Trump. I mean, it's really possible that the east wind could be Obama. And then, like, when the east wind is kind of blowing to Trump, you know, he's acting like Obama. He's doing similar stuff to the east wind. So, okay, so that's that verse, okay? And then, let's see. Okay, did I miss something here? Okay. So then in Mark 14:72, in this verse, it says, immediately a rooster crowed a second time, and Peter remembered how Jesus made the remark to him, before a rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. And he began to weep. So, let's see. You know, so I thought that was interesting because we see times kind of listed in this verse. You will deny me 3 times. So we see before a rooster crows twice could be a connection to these 2 wings of the great eagle. You know, another bird crowing twice. You know, so 2 messiahs kind of saying, who are you going to follow? And before that happens, there's going to be a 3 times denial, you know, which we've seen that with the deal of the century, the 666, you know. So definitely very interesting. Okay, so then in Daniel 12, so I wanted, you know, so let me read this to you. But as for you, Daniel, conceal these words and seal up the book until the end of time. Many will go back and forth, and knowledge will increase. Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, 2 others were standing, one on this bank of the river, and the other on that bank of the river. And let's see. Let me read that again. One on this bank of the river, and the other on that bank of the river. And one said to the man dressed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, how long will it be until the end of these wonders? And I heard the man dressed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, as he raised his right hand and his left toward heaven, and swore by him who lives forever, that it would be for a time, times, and half a time. And as soon as they finished shattering the power of the holy people, all these will be completed. Okay. So there's a connection with these verses. So we see the time, times, and half a time in these verses. And I thought it was interesting. It talks about conceal these words. Because we see this repeated in Revelation 10. So it said, okay, so in Revelation 10, it says, I saw another strong angel coming down out of heaven, clothed with a cloud, and the rainbow was upon his head. And his face was like the sun, and his feet like pillars of fire. And he had in his hand a little book, which was open. He placed his right foot on the sea and his left on the land. And he cried out with a loud voice, as when a lion roars. roars, and when he cried out, the seven peals of thunder uttered their voices. When the seven peals of thunder had spoken, I was about to write, and I heard a voice from heaven saying, Seal up the things which the seven peals of thunder have spoken, and do not write them. Then the angel whom I saw standing on the sea and on the land lifted up his right hand to heaven, and swore by him who lives forever and ever, who created heaven and the things in it, and the earth and the things in it, and the sea and the things in it, that there will be delay no longer. But in the days of the voice of the seventh angel, when he is about to sound, then the mystery of God is finished, and as he preached to his servants the prophets. Then the voice which I heard from heaven, I heard again speaking with me, and saying, Go, take the book which is open in the hand of the angel who stands on the sea and the land. So I went to the angel, telling him to give me the little book. And he said to me, Take it and eat it. It will make your stomach bitter, but in your mouth it will be sweet as honey. I took the little book out of the angel's hand and ate it. And in my mouth it was sweet as honey. And when I had eaten it, my stomach was made bitter. And they said to me, You must prophesy again concerning many peoples and nations and tongues and kings. Okay, so what I think you want to do is compare the there's a guy who's the one angel who's standing on the 1 foot on the bank and 1 foot, or 1 foot on the land and 1 foot on the sea. What's interesting about this guy in Revelation 10 is he only has one hand raised up to heaven, whereas the angelic figure in Daniel has two hands raised to heaven. And then, so if you compare the differences between these two people, I think Trump is the one who has 1 foot on the sea, which is lies, the sea of lies, and then he has 1 foot on the land, because he's been doing things that affect Israel, so that's his left foot on the land. And then he's got a little book in his hand. Okay, the deal of the century. It's kind of like a little book. It's 181 pages or something like that. So it's like a little book. And also, too, the reason why you want to call it a little book is that there's no power in it. Okay, it's little. This deal of the century, it's not going to bring peace to Israel. And then, so what's interesting too is that this angel says that there will be delay no longer. Okay, so remember that Trump said, okay, I'm not going to delay this deal of the century, I'm going to reveal it, because he's getting tired of waiting for Israel to get their stuff together. And so God tells, what he tells John, I guess, to take the book, and to eat it, and he talks about it's going to be sweet in your mouth, but it's going to make your stomach bitter, so it might, on the surface, the deal of the century might seem sweet, but if you eat it, it's going to make your stomach bitter. So anyways, and what I think is interesting too, so this concept of concealing and sealing up, is that God talks about in the last days he's going to put a deluding influence, so this deal of the century has caused people to kind of go under delusion, so definitely very interesting. Let's see. Okay, so then we also see in Daniel 7 where it talks about the little horn, and then 3 of the first horns were pulled out by the roots before it. Okay, and this horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man and a mouth uttering great boast. Okay, so the 3 horns would be Obama, Clinton, and Kerry were pulled out by the roots when Trump became president, and so he's the little horn that has great boast. Does that not describe him? And then it says, I kept looking because of the sound of the boastful words which the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain and its body was destroyed and given to the burning fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but an extension of life was granted to them for an appointed period of time. So we're going to see them come back. Okay, Obama and Clinton. As for me, Daniel, my spirit was distressed within me, and the visions in my mind kept alarming me. I approached one of those who were standing by and began asking him the exact meaning of all of this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. These great beasts, which are four in number, are four kings who will rise from the earth. Then I desired to know the exact meaning of the fourth beast, which was different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, with its teeth of iron and its claws of bronze, which devoured, crushed, and trampled down the remainder with its feet. And the meaning of the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn which came up, and before which 3 of them fell, namely that horn which had eyes and a mouth, uttering great boast, and which was larger in appearance than its associates. I kept looking, and that horn was raging war with the saints and overpowering them. Thus he said, the fourth beast will be a fourth kingdom in the earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms, and will devour the whole earth and tread it down and crush it. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings will arise, and another will arise after them, and he will be different from the previous ones, and will subdue 3 kings. He will speak out against the Most High and wear down the saints of the Highest One, and he will intend to make alterations in times and in law. They will be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. But the court will sit for judgment, and his dominion will be taken away, annihilated, and destroyed forever. Okay, so like the 10 horns and everything, rose up during the time of Obama, and then Trump, kind of subdues 3 of them until God allows them to come back. And so is Trump not wearing down us who follow the true Messiah? Because aren't we kind of tired, and worn down? I mean, in Daniel, it talks about extreme weariness because we're weary. We're tired of this season in the world right now. Anyways, so I'm hoping we're near the end of the time frame of the time, and half the times. Okay, and then talking about the 8th day, possible 8th day was after the deal of the century was February 5th when Trump was acquitted, because it says on the 8th day he sent the people away and they blessed the king. Or the 8th day could be February 9th, where we read a psalm where it says the prayers of David were concluded. There was a 737 had a hard landing on that day, a siren in Israel on that day, or February 10th, which was the 15th of Shabbat. So possible fulfillment of the 8th day. So basically with Trump, he had his 2 feasts, his 2 weeks, and then, he sent the people home, which meant kind of okay, now they're like being sent home is a picture of you're in the camp, and so God used the deal of the century and the State of the Union to cause people to get into Trump's camp, so and also the fact that he was acquitted could have deceived people to think that God's all positive about him. So let's see. So remember in Revelation 11, we have the 2 witnesses when they have finished their testimony. Okay, so they finished their testimony. Deal of the century, was released by the 2 witnesses, Trump and Netanyahu. The next step is war. Okay, so then it says, now it came about on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace in front of the king's rooms, and the king was sitting on his royal throne in the throne room opposite the entrance to the palace. When the king saw Esther the queen standing in the court, she obtained favor in his sight, and the king extended to Esther the golden scepter which was in his hand. So Esther came near and touched the top of the scepter. On the 3rd day, God allows Esther, whoever Esther is, to go into the inner court. Okay, the golden scepter could be Israel. So what I think we're going to see on the 3rd day is that God's going to allow, basically, I'm wondering if it's going to be this Erdogan, this Turkey guy. It says, on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal robes, that could be a connection to the king of Judah who puts on his royal robes and he goes into battle. Um, um, and the king of Israel doesn't, he goes into battle like secretly, which kind of interesting, a connection to Purim with the mask. Um, so like the king of Israel, it the Ephraimites are still, they still have their mask on. Um, and then, but then Esther is given favor on the third day, you know, and allows Esther to go into the inner court. One connection that I see is that in the story of Job, you have, what is that figure? I think, it's a figure of the serpent. I can't remember what it's called, whatever the name is for, Satan. He's with the angels or whatever, and God's like, ask him, what are you doing? Oh, I don't have my Bible, otherwise I'd look it up. He says, what are you doing, or what have you been doing? And he says, going back and forth. Okay, so that's a connection to the raven that goes back and forth. And so then God says, consider my, my servant Job. And so basically God allows Satan to attack Job. So I think that is what we're going to see on the third day, on this, the half a time that we're looking for, this third day period. Okay, and then we got the gathering of the kings, to gather them together for the war of the great day of God the Almighty. So I think I talked about that in my last video. And I said, don't fall into tar pits. Don't sleep like other people do. Don't think the day of the Lord has come with Trump. He's a false Messiah. God's going to send a deluding influence. Okay. So, don't be in the sea with Obama. Don't be in the sea with Trump. You want to be on the dry land with Messiah where there's no lies. And so, just some concluding remarks. Okay, so basically what I'm looking for is, I think we're done with the time. We're done with the times. Okay, so like the time, the one could definitely connect to the deal of the century. And then we have the 2 weeks, okay? But then there was another week. Like, so that gets kind of confusing. But the 2 weeks with the deal of the century. And then another week where God says he's going to bring judgment. And then now we're looking for the half the time, okay? And which we could be in, or this could be a dress rehearsal for the half the time. So like, we're gonna, see, because Esther says we're gonna fast, or let the Jews fast for 3 days, night or day, and then we'll fast for 3 days, night and day. So maybe the half the time there's 2 fulfillments, okay? So like I said, we'll see what happens in the next couple days. So don't get discouraged if nothing happens. It's the, I think something's going to happen, but we'll see what happens. And so this could be the dress rehearsal for, the final fulfillment of the half the time. And so just some closing comments about the season that we're in. Did you not see in the news about Trump being in India? Okay, so I watched this. Okay, this is craziness. The, just how people follow Trump like he is, a rock star, and so they just went crazy for him in India. And, just a huge ceremony for him and stuff like that. And so even in other countries, Trump is really worshipped. And what was interesting to me is that I heard today, I didn't realize that India was, persecuting their Christians. And so, I heard today on the CBN news, they were hoping that Trump talked to the India guy, the Indian leader, about, hey, you need to do something about persecuting these Christians. Well, so it's interesting to me. I mean, it's doubtful that Trump said anything, because I just don't think he's as good of a person as people think. It's interesting that Trump's just like friends with all of these, brutal dictators and stuff like that. Um, so definitely very interesting. Oh, and what did they say? Okay, I wrote this down. They they had a billboard about Trump coming to India, and they mentioned about him being the friend of, I think they said great friend of India. Let's see, where did I write this down? Um, um, and it was interesting that that happened on the 24th too. So that was another interesting thing. So we had Netanyahu declaring war. We had um, Trump in India acting like some great savior, some great friend. Yeah, India's best friend. That's what they wrote about him um, on the billboard. So very interesting. And then, okay, so that was definitely kind of interesting. And then, I wanted to mention, I think I said this before, but also we have to be aware of, like, when we followed history, God always made sure that if there was a guy in Israel that was ready to divide the land, the guy in America would not be ready to divide the land. Okay, so that was how God kept his land safe. Well, so now we're in a very unique situation where we have both the president and, um, I mean, it's not totally unique because I think this happened before, but where we're at is we have two people willing to divide the land. Okay, so what God has to do, and he's always done this before, is that one of these people um, is going to die. Okay, and I talked before about how judgment, comes in Judah first because they're the leaders. Okay, so definitely I mean, something's got to happen. Okay, because they're working on measuring the land. They're working on trying to get, you know, this peace deal fulfilled. And I think God's going to intervene with judgment before that happens. So look for that. So definitely an interesting time that we're in. What was very interesting too is that today, CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, issued a warning about the coronavirus. Okay, um, like for America, they're saying, we have to watch out for this. Is what they said, because it's coming here. And so it's interesting to me because I think it's just further judgment. Well, so what was very interesting to me was that Trump today, he's acting like a prophet. What Trump said is, so like if you listen to Trump, all the stuff that he says, he's so positive, like we're gonna be great, we're gonna, you know, we're gonna make it out of it, good things are gonna happen. So basically what he said is it's going to be okay about the coronavirus. So he is acting like a prophet, declaring that things are going to be okay. So if you're aware of the fact that Trump is a false prophet and a false messiah, I don't think things are going to be okay. I mean, they're going to be okay for God's people, because I think God's going to send his Messiah who's going to separate out his people, um, and he's going to mark us with the seal, not the 666 mark, that like we kind of have that mark now because we voted for Trump and he's our president. But the Messiah is going to come and give us the true seal of God. He's going to set us free from the judgment of Trump, um, and give us the seal of God. And then judgment's going to come on Obama's people and Trump's people. So that's what we're waiting for. And I'm not really sure what else we need to see happen. And so I think the day is really soon. Like, really want, I want to say kind of like God told Moses to tell people, be ready for the third day. Because I think, like, it could happen tonight. I think we are so close, seriously. And so definitely be ready for the third day. Um, which is like, um, which is the day of judgment, maybe this third day also relates to Jesus's resurrection. So and there's all these verses where we see like judgment and resurrection all happen at the same time. Um, so that's what we're waiting for. And so it's really close. So hang in there. I know times are hard. I know it's discouraging. I know we're all suffering extreme weariness right now. Um, but it's really close. So if you can just hang in there a little bit longer, it's going to be good. Remember, when Jesus comes, it's going to be like, a dream, you know, um, and so um, so hang in there. It's gonna be great when Jesus comes. And so just I think it's close. So be ready for the third day. It's gonna happen. I think it's gonna just like happen like that. In the twinkling of an eye. It's just all of a sudden, you know, a reversal of fortunes. Like, Joseph was in jail, and quick, boom, he's on the top of the world. So, um, it's just gonna happen fast. So hang in there, be encouraged. Thanks so much for listening. I really appreciate. Consider what I have to say. Open God's word. And definitely, you know, you can never fail by being in God's word. And so, thanks so much for listening. God bless. I really appreciate you following me and listening to me. So hopefully this was encouraging. So, thanks for your time. God bless.